From the former convent of the Good Shepherd overlooking Inwood Hill Park here in Inwood, New York City. Welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we welcome dancer Sloka Iyengar. Sloka is a dancer and scientist, passionate about the power of science to change the world for its most vulnerable populations and the importance of communication to effect that change. She is a practitioner as well of Bharatnatyam and is interested in using its narrative and storytelling aspects to reach wider audiences. She is also interested in the convergence of arts and sciences and has created productions exploring and defining this convergence. We are going to talk to her about her art and perhaps some science and see where these two meet with dance. But first, let me welcome you, Sloka, to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's been a long time. How are you?
Doing really well. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, let's just dive right in. The type of dance you practice is traditional Bharatnatyam. Can you give our listeners a crash course, if you will, in its origin and what defines the style of this dance?
Yeah, so Bharatnatyam actually originated in about 2,000 years ago in the temples of South India. India, of course, went through a lot of political upheavals, a lot of cultural upheavals, of course, the biggest one being that we were colonized for several hundred years. And so Bharatnatyam also did have a lot of influence from, as a result of the colonization. So in its original form, it was being practiced by these hereditary dancers. So the dance form was passed on from, mother to daughter. The music and the percussion that goes with it was passed on from father to son and to son. So it was really a hereditary dance done by a particular community in South India called the Devadasis. Things happened, with many changes happened in the Indian subcontinent, and the dance really fell into a bit of a disrepute. So it wasn't performed that much, and there's many ways you can think of it. Revival is probably the wrong word because in a way there was nothing to revive, but in the recent 150 years there was some sort of this belief that this dance could be systematized to reach wider audiences, and so now it is one of the most famous Indian classical dances that is done outside of India. It's so India has hundreds if not thousands of dances. What is called classical, again, there could be a debate on what is classical, what is not. There's 7 classical dance forms and there's hundreds of folk dances. So Bharatanatyam is one of the 7 classical dance forms that originated in South India. There's a very rich vocabulary of facial gestures, of hand gestures, and I like to think of it as a toolbox. It's a language that you can use to tell pretty contemporary stories as well.
Well, you led me right into my next question, actually, because there is a storytelling narrative that the form follows as well. And there are specific footwork, gestures, and physical vocabulary that needs to follow to tell these stories, right?
Mm-hmm. So exactly. So the way it is taught, just the pedagogy of Bharatanatyam, it's pretty involved, as are most things.
Sounds like a real true scientist.
Yes.
The pedagogy of Bharatanatyam. It's like you can see sitting on a shelf that thick.
That is, yes. So the way it is taught is that you learn. The first thing that we learn is pretty much stamping our feet, but stamping our feet in rhythm. And then there's a huge vocabulary of how many rhythmic patterns. Then you learn gestures of the neck, of the eye, and then the storytelling. And you, in a way, are always telling stories because even when you're stamping your feet, you're always taught to imagine, like a horse or a train or something. So in a way, storytelling is really ingrained in the dance, even if you're not telling a story about a person or something.
Well, for those that have not been exposed to the form, there's also a certain melodic structure that is specific to the form as well. So not just a physical vocabulary, but there's a musical, own musical language, right?
Exactly. So the the dance originated in South India. The music that typically goes with the dance, although now, there is, in a way, there is no limit, but the music form is called Carnatic music. And we all probably have heard of raga. So raga is that melodic structure. There's 72, if I'm not mistaken, they're called parent ragas. And then there's like thousands of sub ragas. So the really interesting thing is how melodies create emotions, and how a certain rhythmic structure or a melodic structure can create this emotion of compassion or of valor or of, any of the other emotions.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, because I'm going to try very desperately to tie in your two major forms here. I'll attempt to, and to tie in your double life as a neuroscientist here. So I did a little homework on you, and I'm going to quote you somewhere in life. I won't say what year or what day or where you were, but you said, quote, "Science is the theoretical study of reality. Dance, to me, is the practical study of reality," end quote. So scientific method is a journey to explain the world, obviously. And that's how and why, the how and why we do what we do, right? As you just kind of set up, there are specific methods to dancing Bharatnatyam, and the exploration of a deliberate processes and intentions through its own world of storytelling. So it has its own method, right? So is this where they converge to come to a greater understanding of the world, either emotionally, physically, or cognitively?
Oh my God, I am so happy you said that. But absolutely, I think the storytelling aspect is, you can do all amazing science in the world, but if it doesn't reach out to people in a form of a story, which really is something that, there's a reason why we think of our narratives as stories, because there's something really powerful about that narrative structure in our brain and in the brains of the audience. So definitely, I think, the storytelling aspect of science and of dance and how it can be used to communicate. I think the other really interesting thing is what kind of creativity is possible in the confines is probably the wrong word, but with the limits of a dance form that's 2,000 year old, and for science, the scientific method. And I think the really exciting thing is just all that creativity that is possible. So, yeah.
So what's possible? Have you? I'm going going rogue here. Have you? Because I love the idea that you have all this form, and you have these 7 traditional forms, and then from these 7, you say, okay, there's let's pick Bharatnatyam, you have 1,000 different expressions of that form, and how it's been, and then you have the physical and oral history of that form. And so I can't help that you have made it your own. And I'm curious of have you created your own form, obviously respecting the tradition, but also creating your own language with your form?
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun doing it, but showing how neurons communicate through the medium of dance. What is really exciting is that, it's all movement. So the way neurons talk to one another, I'm going to go super fun here.
I like fun.
But, you have a neuronal cell body, and then you have these long thread-like structures called either dendrites or axons. And the whole point of neuronal communication is this travel. It's movement. It's movement in a micro scale, but it's still movement. So one of the things I did was go from the communication of a few neurons to the communication of the brain, and then looking at how that brain, because how their brain or how our brains perceive the world around us. So whether it be vision or smell or, movement. So how to take the movement of neurons to our movement here in real life.
Did you get all that, people at home? Did you follow around? But I got it all, actually. Thank you very much. And I think it's, again, communication, right? It's the forms of communication and how and message sent, message received.
Exactly.
In its basic form.
Exactly.
I'm just giving you Cliff Notes version, folks, if you're listening at home. And so, but then tie that into the emotion, though. You can only learn so much. How much do you give away? I guess the question is like jazz, for instance, is there room to deviate? Like, so you can play like when the Saints come marching in. Like, there's specific. We know you can list. You can recognize the song when some and you can argue no one plays the song the same way twice, or has their own composition of it or their own arrangements for it. So I'm curious, within your dancing, are you able, and your science with the dancing, it's like, do you allow for that variance of emotion to change the storytelling? Like, are you? And the question is like, how far away are you? I won't say allowed, but do you feel permissible to deviate from the tradition and to putting your own personalization on it, and then also bringing it back to being within the form?
Yeah, I think the amazing part is, and one of my teachers always said, always used to say, all the emotions are within us, so we feel, we feel homesick, we feel compassion. So the external structure is just that, it is just an external platform. And there is tons and tons of freedom. So like one of the things, I moved from India to the US when I was 22. And I think homesickness was like I used to work at an animal shelter taking care of like dogs and birds and snakes, and just like leaving those animals behind was like, and of course leaving everybody else behind.
And the people too, I guess. People. Secondarily, of course, but still.
But I had created,
sorry, Mom. The snakes came first. I'm sorry, that was terrible.
But I had created such a powerful bond with these animals, and just having to leave them, for this world of science that I knew was going to be very, very exciting. And so one of the things I've done, at home, it probably is not released yet, is just like this feeling of homesickness. So there is, and the amazing thing about the rasas, that as they're called in Bharatnatyam, is it's never just one. So, for example, if I were to take the example of homesickness, there is this sadness at leaving one's home, but then there's also this excitement for this new world that comes. So I think there is really space for exploring, that nothing is all just sadness or all just happiness. The one thing, just when I was doing my PhD, there was, my lab overlooked it wasn't a garden, it was like a place that had a lot of trees. And one of the trees was this like 100-year-old oak tree. And I had spent so many hours, working, but also looking at the squirrels and the birds. And then finding out later that, someone had cut the tree, not sure why. And it was just like, that really inspired me to create a dance on the life of the tree. And, the life of the squirrels, the birds, and all the animals. So even though the form is traditional, whatever traditional is, there is really space to tell, stories that are very contemporary, which is the amazing part of all of this.
It's wonderful. Yeah, your own self-expression and your story lives on through traditional forms.
Exactly.
And it's great that you have the vocabulary to be able to use and adapt it. Like I said, it's a new language, and I find it just really wonderful that that's the language you chose to express your grief and your happiness too for this tree and squirrels and everything else happening on there. And that time in your life you can reflect on that.
Exactly.
It's a great. And it just so happens to be a science story too.
Yeah.
In a way, studying, what can you say? But speaking of science as well, you've been able to use your dance methodology and storytelling to help others understand science concepts. And it's through Samyukta NYC, correct? So you can tell us more about that.
Sure. So, Samyukta is a Sanskrit word that means to bring together. So it's bringing together arts and sciences. It's also bringing together, I don't know, this is so cliched, but East and the West, in a way.
There's the East and West of the Broadway here.
That is true.
There's the East and West of the United States, East Coast, West Coast. There's maybe East India and West India.
That is true.
There you go. Okay.
That is true. But the point of, exploring the convergence as to what happens on a neuronal level, so what is happening in the brain that enables dance, and how does dance change the brain? And there is quite a bit of similar work on music. So there's a reason why music is so powerful. We can think of a music from like a certain era in our journey, and really like that brings up the same or similar emotions. So there is some work being done on how dance changes the brain. And of course, like a big interest of mine is, how do we perceive rhythm? Like what is happening in the brain that tells us that, the rhythm of like an ocean wave is different from the rhythm of like a lullaby. And so like looking at, so Samyukta is an entity to, that I sort of developed to look at this convergence, and then taking it a step ahead, also thinking of Bharatnatyam, the narrative and the storytelling aspects, and using it for direct public impact. So perhaps for people, one of the things happening this spring is using some of those aspects for people with dementia, and also for people with Parkinson's. So what aspects of Bharatanatyam can be used to make it really that language?
Yeah, and you just, particularly with dementia too, is that, there's something lost of yourself associated with dementia. And curious that if you're able to create a story and put it into dance and using that vocabulary, unless you forget the steps, that story is never lost.
Exactly. And also, like, there is, in a way, it like you mentioned, it lives on, right?
Yeah.
So, dementia isn't, like how reality is an interesting thing, but how do those stories live on in the moment?
Yeah,
Through...
and the perception of that reality too.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Very interesting. So where are you with that work now? And when can I sign up for a class?
Shortly.
Great. And so where do we go, speaking of, to follow you in all things science and dance?
Oh, sure. So my website is Sloka, Sloka, my first name and my last name, .net. So yeah, everything or many things I'm doing is right there.
Well, you have your instructions, people. She's so, as you see, lovely, but also incredibly smart, incredibly passionate, and she's a great dancer. Unfortunately, it's a podcast. You really can't hear her dance, so otherwise we would have it happen. But you'll perhaps see her. You come to Inwood Artworks events. You've seen her perform a number of times, and we hope to have her again at
Oh
some
my God.
point.
Thank you so much for this. It was amazing.
Absolutely. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you, of course. Listeners, you can find her link to her website in the description of this episode. Thanks again to Sloka for joining me on this Artist Spotlight episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment right now, please show us some love by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. Many thanks to Church of Good Shepherd here in Inwood, New York City for hosting us, and to HideSites.com for Uptown promotional support. You can support On Air and all of our programming by making a tax-free donation at inwoodartworks.nyc/donate. Be sure to follow us on social media at Inwood Artworks to keep up all that we do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, pop art galleries, live performances, and so much more. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with City Council. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Artworks On Air.